hi, Bubala Mumba, who will be speaking. He's from, Sanitation and Water for All, the focal point in Zambia. And also the national coordinator of the Zambia NGO WASH Forum. And so she'll be discussing her experience in advocating for the government's full WASH sector budget, the money that is there. How do we make sure that we can use accountability and participation, those cornerstones of integrity, so that this funding is actually available and used? Okay, Bubala. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, SWA and Water Integrity Network, for the opportunity to share about the work that we're doing in Zambia. I thought I should just speak lightly to what the NGO WASH Forum is. We're a 40-member strong network of NGOs and civil society organizations that are working to improve water and sanitation in Zambia. We are comprised of international NGOs and local NGOs and community-based organizations. And since our inception in 2007, we have worked to influence and support the performance of the WASH sector in Zambia, and advocate not only for improved financing, but it must be equitable and also sustainable service delivery, but also strengthening civil society's capacity and participation in some of these spaces. Yeah, so we can go to the next slide. So some of you have never been to Zambia. Zambia's, the next slide, please. Okay, so there's little Zambia. Zambia's in Southern Africa, and those are some of our neighbors. I just thought I should just mention it. We're landlocked, and we have a population currently of around 19.6 million people. Okay, next slide. So in terms of our coverage, you can see from the figures, I've tried to show the red is rural, the blue is urban, and you can see, you can sort of see the inequity that exists in terms of access. Urban is quite far ahead. This is some of the things that we have spoken about, that the spending within urban areas per capita is much more than the rural areas, where many more Zambians live. You can see even for hand washing and sanitation, the figures are still quite low. I think our open defecation rate stands at somewhere around 19 to 20%. But overall, as a country, our water access stands at 72.3%, and we're at 54.4% for sanitation and 24.7% for hand hygiene. Next slide, please. So in terms of the budget allocation, we have averaged 2.4 to 1.8% between 2020 and 2021. And then for 2020, the budget for 2023, we saw a decrease, which we, in our advocacy statements, to the government, we reminded them of the commitment that they have made to progressively increase investment to the water sector. But this is just to show you what the trend has been like over the last couple of years. So we can go to the next slide. So some of the challenges that Zambia has been facing, we did a trend analysis, a 10-year trend analysis, which showed that our WASH sector performance was averaging 37%. So if the government committed to give us $100, they were only giving us $37 of the money that they said they were going to give us. And in the last, we have a 5-year development planning process. And in the last 7 NDP, it was acknowledged that part of the reason why it slowed down progress was on account of the poor financing. We've got inadequate and dilapidated infrastructure in some places. The informal settlements is a challenge. Climate change is also becoming a real issue for Zambia. But added to that, we have encroachment of water sources and recharge zones. Non-revenue water is very high as 52% in some cases. And then the tariffs in some instances were last reviewed in 2018, but we have high energy costs. So the commercial utilities are bleeding out money, trying to survive. Added to that, we have a huge debt stock. Zambia is in austerity, and we've been negotiating with the IMF to give us a credit facility just to allow us some space. So this conversation around the debt was one of the strong advocacy points that we noted, because debt spending was actually higher than social sector spending at some point. Sectors such as health, education, and water were getting peanuts in comparison to the huge debt stock. So as of 2021, well, our GDP stood at $26.9 billion. And in 2021, it was the GDP public debt ratio was as high as 124%. Yeah, so as you can imagine, there was very little room for investment. Next slide, please. So some of the strategies that we employed, I mean, this hasn't, it's been like 5 years in the running. We built alliances with other networks because we recognize that the other sectors were not also getting sufficient monies. So we partnered with other networks that were doing gender, poverty, alleviation, disability, education, and social protection, so that when we were not in the room, if they were in different spheres, there was always somebody speaking WASH. We also engaged with the political parties. We reviewed their political manifestos, and also where there were gaps, we were able to say, you know, you need to invest. You haven't considered climate change. Where's your policy on climate change? That we then began, because to say, you know, you make some of the political commitments that you make, you know, so you're elected on the basis that you're going to provide WASH services in your community. So you owe the people, you owe your constituents the services. What are you going to do? So we were also making a good case with members of parliament. Also, we began dialoguing with the Ministry of Finance, the National Planning, and the Ministry of Water Development. If there was a national process that required the ministry, so focused on the human rights conversation, particularly because of the debt. And we spoke to the fact that, yes, the reality is there's a debt situation, but the reality is the poor. You cannot infringe on people's human rights simply because there's no money. You have to find a way to make sure that we're not infringing on people's human rights. And then also where there was a national development planning process, like I put in my earlier slide, the disparity between the spending in urban and rural settings was one of the key points that we advocated in the next development agenda, which ends in 2026. And that was one of the things that was adopted in the 8th NDP, that the government will focus on advancing of investing more in rural areas, particularly focusing on women and girls in the next 5 years. So next slide. So some of the outcomes of our financing advocacy is the adoption of the submissions that we have made to various committees. Some of the adoptions that we have made have been adopted into the recommendations in their reports that they make to the Speaker or to the House. Also, we have seen an increase in the visibility of water and sanitation and hygiene in Zambia, particularly in the highest office of the land. We've had several pronouncements. The president is really passionate about water and sanitation. In his address last week to Parliament, he has said that the community constituency development fund must be used more to provide services for people at community level. So we have a lot of political will, but we use that as a basis to say that political will alone is insufficient. We need the resources to match. We have a pronouncement that all public facilities and public spaces now must have waterborne sanitation facilities, which will require more investment. He made that pronouncement last year, and now the Ministry of Water has to run with it. Added to that, we have seen an improvement in accountability within the planning and reporting mechanisms. We have regular meetings within the different sectors, like we're clustered according to sectors. So for WASH, we're clustered with health and education, but we meet with all the other clusters, and we're able to ask questions on why progress is slow, why targets haven't been met. And the government's representatives seem quite open these days, and they share some of the challenges that they face, whether it's with procurement processes that slow down services getting to the people. Also, we have now got a large number of MPs who have expressed willingness to set up a WASH parliamentary caucus that will discuss and will champion WASH issues in the Zambian parliament. And the most important one, this one was a great achievement. Even though we saw a decrease for the time in over 10 years, the WASH sector received 94.1% of its allocation in the national budget, which for us was a great win, from 37% to 94.1%. So for us, this was a demonstration that we not only have a responsive government, but finally we have, the WASH sector has the attention of the government in terms of the priority and its ability to contribute to not only to economic development, but also good health outcomes. Next slide. Okay, we can put the next slide. So that's just a few pictures of Parliament with some members with the government ministries and some community engagements. Thank you.